Hello my friends and welcome back. I am Ricardo, aka the Mad Hatter, and in this series about color theory, we're exploring its concepts and principles to exploit them in our creative use of light and color. With the last episode, we wrapped the first block of this series about light and contrast. If you haven't checked the previous episodes, I would highly recommend you do, and you can find them in the playlist that's popping up on screen right now. Today, we are finally ready to dive into color. And if you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a thumb up. Color. There's so much to analyze, discuss and understand about this concept. Color, more than light and contrast, can influence our perception. Thus, we need to look both at the technical and psychological aspects of it. Rather than making an absurdly long, comprehensive video, I believe it's best that we unpack all this information into small bits that are easier to digest. As we did for contrast and exposure, let's start with the definition. How would you define color? Color is the property of matter that produces visual sensations in the eye. It is affected by how matter reflects or emits light. The key part of this definition is that color is a sensation. Although we don't need to understand exactly how our eyes work, understanding the basic structure of them is useful for our conversation. In our eye, there are three groups of specialized cells called receptive cones, who are responsible for detecting different wavelengths of color. In particular, these three groups have evolved to recept long, medium, and short wavelength, respectively. Long wavelength are linked to red, medium to green, and short to blue. The important part here is that the number of cells dedicated to medium wavelength is much greater than the other two. This means that our eye is naturally better at detecting variations in green shades than blues and reds. This is also the reason why, as you're grading, you might find it more difficult to nail down a green field rather than a blue sky or a skin tone. As this is our first video about color, I don't want to be too technical. Although the concepts that we're going to look at in the future videos are essential to properly work and use color, they can look intimidating. So for today, I want to focus on the psychological aspect of color. The emotional and psychological response that people have to different colors can be used to influence their mood, behavior, and decision-making process. Thus, you can see how important it is to understand the psychological aspects of color to then deliberately use it in a storytelling, as well as, for example, in commercials. Although the individual response might vary depending on environmental factors, generally, the response that we have to color is really linked to evolution. Let's now look at a few frames that are great examples of practical use of color psychology. Here we are, but not in DaVinci today. We're looking at a presentation that I prepared specifically for today and that you can find in the description below in case you just want to have it for yourself. Completely free, of course. So, color psychology. As we already discussed, color can influence people's behavior and mood. I've selected a few different shots that represent the main colors, so you can see red, green, yellow, purple, blue, and cyan. As we already discussed as well, colors can be associated to meanings that are related to evolutionary aspects. And this can be, for example, the green of the forest is relaxing because it feels natural, it feels comfy. Because it feels cozy to us. That's why, for example, having a straw in a forest is so much more relaxing than having one in a city. Even discounting all the noises of the city and everything. At the same time, we do associate red with blood. And thus we associate it with more visceral, emotional states of mind. That doesn't mean it's only positive or negative, that can be both. It's just that it's something that does make us feel a bit more active, a bit more on edge. Let's now look at individual colors and how can they affect our perception and our mood. Let's look at red. That is mostly a strong and energetic color, a color that excites us because again, it's often related to blood, to meat, to all those visceral emotions. So it can be associated with rage and anger, and we can see a frame here from the Royal Tenenbaum where, well, in this case, Royal is pretty angry, but also It can be associated with danger and urgency, as we can see here in this frame from Pulp Fiction. It can be associated with power and wealth. And this is interesting because this frame, okay, here, yeah, he's angry. So we go to the first meaning we discussed, but he's also a wealthy man. So you see, we have both the meanings. A color does not mean one single thing all the time. It can convey multiple different emotions as well. And then red can be associated with love and passion. So for that, I picked what I think is the best visual representation of that, which is Her, the movie, where literally the red color embodies the love of the protagonist. As we said before, green is a bit on the different end of the spectrum, where it can associate with calmness. In general, it has a positive meaning, but this doesn't mean it has only that. It can have a negative meaning as well, because we can associate it with sickness, especially because we can associate it to something rotting, for example. And here we have two very different framings. One, it's a very calming framing and inviting framing. The other, given how cooler the green is, it's almost cyan. It's not cyan, but it's almost there. It feels more rot, more acid, more grungy, right? And that's why there's so much difference between these two frames, although the color is more or less the same. It can be associated with envy. And here we can see a perfect example of how combining different colors can also better convey a message. So envy is slightly more cultural because it's more of a Western thing. But still, if you look at Pixar movies, for example, they are fantastic examples of use of color in a diegetic way, where the color is really telling a story, and probably Inside Out is the best example possible. But in this case, looking at this frame, we associate green with envy, but we also have red about passion and love, because envy is often related to, you know, maybe an uncorresponded love, for example. Then green again can be associated with safety and also luck. That again, luck is more a bit of a cultural meaning. If you think also about St. Patrick, it's kind of associated with money as well. Now looking at yellow, well, yellow is more associated, for example, with sun, and so it has mostly happy, cheerful meanings. Yellow scene is most of the time a warm scene, and so it feels inviting and comforting. It can represent joy and happiness, for example, but it can also represent warmth, and so again, an inviting, a cozy environment and scene. There is still, though, an interesting aspect to yellow. Yellow is a color that really catches our eye, and so yellow is often associated with attention. And if you think about, for example, road signs then outlets for you are yellow. And then yellow, again, as it sets apart from everything else, can also be used to make a character stand out. And it also symbolizes energy, because again, it's often associated with the sun, and sun is most of the time associated with like our main source of energy, our main source of life. And so that's why yellow, it's often felt as a very energetic color. Now speaking about pink, pink is very interesting as a color because it's a very unnatural color, if you will. It's not common in nature by any means. Not meaning that there's no pink and purple in nature, it's just that it's less common. And as such, historically as well, it has always been associated with peculiar things. Peculiar meaning it could be a color that sets you apart, and so it is often linked to royalty and wealth. And you can see that, for example, in old Roman dressing, where they will have purple on their dresses to symbolize they were important members of the society. They can also associate with mystery and magic, because again, it's a color that really is not that common, and so when you see it, it feels like, okay, it is something different, it is something unusual, maybe unnatural or supernatural. And finally, it can be linked to imagination. Imagination is, well, strictly linked to mystery and magic, right? These two concepts are very tight together. And I feel like especially this framing here from Blade Runner really embodies that concept. Now, speaking about blue, blue is kind of similar to green in the sense that it's a very common color in nature. The first thing you might think of when you think of blue is either water or the sky. Two very positive concepts in our mind. And thus blue is often associated with calmness. It's often associated with stability as well. It's a very relaxing color, and it's also a color that really attracts our eye. That's also why, for example, Facebook went blue or decided to use a blue color scheme, because that's almost addicting. As all the other colors though, it can still have a less positive association, and that is usually linked to sadness. We tend to think about blue as the color of sadness, and in this case I chose a scene from Arrival that really embodies the concept of blue sadness. This is also something that really recurs in everyday speech when we say the Blue Monday, for example, right? It's a sad day, the saddest day of the year, it's blue. Finally, going into Sayan. Sayan is a very peculiar color because it's basically midway between green and blue. So it picks both of those colors in terms of like significance, but really is a negative color in general, because again it's an unusual color, but compared to purple, which is really usually bright and inviting, is rather unsettling. So Sayan is often associated with fear, for example, is associated with melancholy, and it's also associated to emotional instability. And these two frames, I feel like they really depict this concept. I hope you enjoyed today's videos and that it gave you at least a few powerful insights, as well as giving you the drive to then dive deeper into the technical aspects of color that we're going to look at in the next videos. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.